If you're building with Ruby on Rails and you're using Hotwire, otherwise known as Turbo, you've probably run into all sorts of gotchas, right? And I know that I still do, even after 2+ years of working with Hotwire in my Rails applications. I just ran into another one, and I wanted to demonstrate how I got around this little gotcha. It's something that I'm finding is not very well documented currently. So, if you're learning Hotwire and learning how to use Turbo in Ruby on Rails, you're probably seeing a lot of tutorials and courses on how to set up forms, right? Like post requests and update requests so that you can, submit a form and then change some content on the page, shoot things into Turbo frames and use Turbo streams in conjunction with forms and post requests, right? That's a pretty common thing, still a little bit tricky in itself, and maybe I'll do other videos on that. But there's another situation that is not very well documented, but I find I run into quite often, and that is handling basic links or GET requests, right? Now, most of the time, a link is a link and it just navigates somewhere, and that's fine. But there are situations where we want a little bit more dynamic functionality. We want it to function more like a single page application. And we still want to make use of Hotwire without needing to go through a post request. And so I want to demonstrate this for you. This week, I've been working on a new checkout flow. It's one of the components in instrumental components. And what I'm going to show you here is a very, very simplified demo of it, just so I can zero in on this specific link where I'm going to use Hotwire. So what we're looking at is sort of like a half-built checkout page. And the way that I want my checkout flow to work is step 1, the user is going to need to register an account. And then step 2, they'll proceed to the checkout flow where they can enter their credit card details and complete their purchase. But in some cases, some users are already registered. So they need to be able to click a link like this one where they can immediately switch to a login form, log into their account, and then continue their checkout flow. And in this situation, I don't want to navigate the user away from the current page. I want to keep them on the checkout page. So this is exactly one of those situations where I do want to make use of Hotwire and Turbo, but I don't want to navigate between, multiple different URLs. Now, this form, you can just picture here that there is a functional form here. I have not built it out. I'm not focusing on a form here. I'm just focusing on this link. So currently this link doesn't do anything, and I'm going to build out the rest of it here. And I'm going to mention a few gotchas that I ran into. Okay, so let's take a look at what I've built so far. I have a checkout controller with a checkout action that handles this checkout page. I've set that checkout page as the root of this little demo Rails app that I just spun up. And then I have started to create 2 actions, which I've not put into use yet. One is called switch to login and switch to register. Trying to keep this as simple and bare bones as possible so that I can demonstrate this. Let's take a look at the checkout view itself. So all of this is what is holding all of this content here. And this here is a partial which holds the register form. That is all of this right here. Let's take a look at that register form partial. And we've got our dummy register form, dummy register button. And then here is our link. And this is what we're going to be working with today. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is set up a similar partial to this register form, which will represent our login form, right? So I'm just going to duplicate and rename this partial to be login form. Okay, so now I've opened the login form, and I'm just going to change the content here to say login form and login continue. Now, you can just sort of picture this to being an actual login form. Again, I'm not going to focus on that here in this video, but this link I want to change to say not registered, register. So in other words, when you're viewing the register form, the link will point to login. If you're viewing the login form, the link will point to register, right? So if I go back to the checkout page and I change this from register form to login form, and I refresh, now we're seeing our login form, login button, and this link is supposed to link us back to the registration form, again, without leaving the page. Of course, we want to do that dynamically. So let's bring it back to the default state. So now we're looking at the registration form. And let's go ahead and connect this link to one of those actions that I had in my controller. So If we're viewing the register page, then we want to click a link that should switch us to the login. So let's use that. Actually, first I need to add a route for that. And this doesn't really matter because we're going to like actually stay on the same page. So now I have routes for switch to login and switch to register. And just to make it really clear, let's actually name those routes. So we have switch to login path and switch to register path. Okay, so this is going to link to switch to login path. Let's try it out and see what happens. Okay, we have an error. We don't have it says it's missing a template for the request text HTML. So it seems to be trying to follow this link just like a regular GET request, a regular link to navigate us to some other page, which we don't have, obviously. So let's get this working using Hotwire. So the first thing that we need to do is when we're clicking this link, we want to replace, I'm going to just click back so we can look at our mock-up here. When I click this link, we want to actually replace all of this content with the login form, right? And so what we're going to need to do is wrap that in a Turbo frame tag. So let's go back to our checkout view, and we're going to wrap this partial in a Turbo frame tag. And we're going to just call that checkout flow, let's call it. Okay, let's click this again and now see what happens. Really, nothing has changed. We haven't done much. We've only added the Turbo frame tag, but we didn't give it any instructions to target that Turbo frame tag. So it's still looking for a regular GET request and it's not finding it. Okay, so let's go back to that link. All right, so let's first look at like the simplest way to handle what we want to do here. And then I'm going to give you a few more options on what you can do. Let's go into our controller and go to the switch to login action here. Again, this is a GET request. So we're not going to be able to process it as if it's like a form request. But what we can do is render turbo stream update. Some of this turbo syntax gets very redundant, unfortunately. Now, I actually just found out about this update method here on turbo streams, which if you're familiar with JavaScript, it's like the same as inner HTML. So we're going to replace the content of the Turbo frame tag checkout flow with the partial, and the AI is finishing our sentence for us, with this partial, the login form. That's this partial right here. I'm going to save that. Okay, so you could see that it worked. Now, a funny thing just happened. I didn't actually click it. I only just hovered over it. So if I refresh again, let's take a look at that one more time. You might have noticed this in some of your projects where, you want the link to do its thing when you click it. You don't want it to do it too soon, like hovering over it. And I've even seen this happen with things like purchase buttons. And if you just accidentally hover over a purchase button, it actually makes a purchase and charges a credit card. Like, we don't want that, right? So this is something to be really careful of. One way to fix that hover issue is to go back to the link, and we're going to add data turbo prefetch false. So by default, Turbo, they have this thing called prefetch, and it's intended to really like speed up your page and sort of try to predict what the user is going to click and start to load that before they even click it. For some reason, they enable that by default, and I frankly don't really like that to be enabled by default. I think it's a little bit dangerous, as I said. So we can disable that on an individual link basis by adding the data attribute turbo prefetch false. Let's refresh the page here and try it again. So if I hover over it, it's actually not going to change. It's going to wait until I actually click it, and now it's going to change. That's what we want. I kind of think that should be the default, but that's how it works. So now, as I just showed you, we could fix that on this individual link, or I actually like to disable it globally on my entire application. So I'm going to get rid of that for now. I'm going to go into my application layout and go into my head. Inside the head tag, I'm just going to add this meta tag up here, which does the same thing. It just applies it globally to all links. So, this basically just turns off that prefetch behavior, which I basically never want to use. I just like to have it so that when people click a thing, the thing happens. There are other situations where I do want hover effects, and in those cases, I'll probably use stimulus or something like that. But for turbo actions, I want that to be false. All right, let's refresh again. And again, it's not happening on the hover state. So that's good. I'm just going to click it. Now we can switch to the login form. Now let's do the same for the registration link. We have not hooked that one up. Oh, it actually is working. I wonder if that's because I have, I think it might be because of this pound sign here. Let's see if I change this to switch to register path, which is what we ultimately want to use. So I'm going to switch to login, and I'm going to now click switch to register. And yeah, that's not actually going to work. The reason why it did work there temporarily was because I was just sort of pointing to this pound sign as a temporary placeholder. But I am going to actually use this switch to login path so that we really complete this functionality. So I'm going to go back to my controller, and we're going to essentially do the same thing on this one. Again, we're going to run a turbo stream update on the same checkout flow turbo frame tag. The only difference here is we're going to now swap in the register form instead of the login form. And now that should be working. Let's take a look. We're looking at the registration form. I'm going to click the link. We go to login. I want to click the link to go back to register. That's not working. Why is that not working? Aha, here it is. So in my login form, it was still linking to the switch to login path. And that's a little typo there. It should be register path. So, this is one of those things where I just kind of confused myself because I'm using a lot of the same code, not very dry, not very, don't repeat yourselves. And so what I probably should do at some point is refactor all of this into a single partial and add some more logic into it. I'm not going to do that in this video, but that was my little mistake there. You can check it out. So it's link to register form is the link that is inside the login form. And when we're viewing the registration form, that one is switched to login path. So let's refresh again. Again, by default, we're looking at the registration form. I'll click the link to go to login, and I can click the link again to go back to registration. And I can easily toggle between the two of them. Nice. Okay, so that is like the most basic way to handle a simple link that's inside of a turbo frame tag, and you just want to kind of swap out the contents. There are a few more gotchas and a few more options that you have that you can work with here. First, a gotcha that I just ran into, which is kind of strange. So what I just showed you was a simple situation where the link resides inside of the turbo frame tag, right? But what if our design works a little bit differently, and we actually want this link to be outside of the turbo frame tag for whatever reason, but just for the sake of an example, let's do this. So let's go back into our registration form where we have this link. I'm going to take it out of that. So now it's gone. And I'm going to go into the checkout view, and I'm going to place it down below. So it's outside of this turbo frame tag, and our link is here. So let's just see what happens now. I refresh. So we have our turbo frame tag here, and it does not include that link. The link is outside of it. Based on what we have in our controller, I'm going to expect that should probably still work, right? Because switch to login is rendering turbo stream. We are targeting the checkout flow turbo frame tag, and we want to replace it with that partial. So that's what I expect to happen. If I click this link, it does sort of happen, right? We see the turbo frame tag has been replaced with the login form, so that's good. But up here, what's happening? I can see that the page is sort of loading or refreshing at a very, very slow rate. Like, that is very confusing to me as a user, and I don't even really know what's going on. It seems to just sort of like go in this like endless loop. I don't even see an error anywhere. So it's very confusing, and I need to fix that, right? So let's just refresh that, and I'll stop that. Now let's just leave this as it is. And I'm going to go back to the checkout view, and let's look at our link here. What we need to do in this situation where the link resides outside of the turbo frame tag is we need to, since this is sort of just a demo, I'm not actually doing any CSS classes. I'll just delete that for now. And we need to actually explicitly target our turbo frame. Okay, so now let's try it again. I'm going to click the link, and it worked, and we don't see any of that weird loading stuff. So it did switch the login form. Now, of course, we still see that. I did not make the same change on both sides of the login register toggle here, but so that worked. I'm just going to refresh again and show you again. Cool. Let's just undo that because I don't actually want my link to be there. I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to add it back in here. Okay, so now we're back to what we had earlier with the very simple link that can toggle both ways. Cool. Now let's look at another case where I want to do a bit more with my design. Maybe it's a little bit more complex. For example, let's say we extend my design to have a little bit more content over here on the right side, and we want that content to be different based on whether the user is viewing the registration form or the login form, right? So for example, let's just build out the rest of our design here. So over here, this is that purchase summary block that I have up here. So for example, you could picture like showing the product and the price and some of the terms and stuff are right here, maybe the checkout total. Below that, let's just show some other content. Let's do something like this. If the user is viewing the registration form, I want to show a message that sort of nudges them to actually proceed and become a member, register for an account, join thousands of other customers, right? That's the message that I want to show to the user if they are registering as a new user, right? But if they are switching to a login form, they're already maybe a customer and they're just coming back for a repeat purchase or something like that. So this message is kind of irrelevant. In that case, I wanted to say, welcome back, right? So if I log in, the login form and showing welcome back makes sense. But if I'm viewing registration, well, now that doesn't make sense, right? So this is something that I want to change based on which version the person is viewing. So let's just try to keep this extremely simple. I'm going to, let's just create two partials, right? I'm going to do register message and login message. So this welcome back message is the login message. And let's display that. Now, by default, we want it to be the register message, right? So default state is we're showing the registration form and we're showing the registration message. So if I click to switch to login, we switched the login form, but we have not yet switched the message, and we want to do that too. So in this case, it's a little bit more complex, right? We want to do sort of two things at once when the user clicks this link. Again, we want to replace the content here, and we want to replace the content here. So let's go ahead and wrap this new block in another Turbo frame tag, and this one is going to be checkout message. Okay, so now we have two Turbo frame tags on the page. We have one for checkout flow and one for checkout message. Okay, so now since I am doing two things and maybe I'm eventually going to do even more things on the page, I want to take the logic out of the controller here, and I want to handle it all in a dedicated Turbo stream file so that I can organize multiple actions to happen at the same time. So let's just go ahead and delete these lines, right? So now this is not going to work anymore, right? Again, we go back to that original error that we've had. So instead, what I want to do is what you've probably seen when you're processing a form, like a post request. You might do something like create.turbostream.erb, and you would put your Turbo actions or Hotwire actions inside that Turbo stream file. I want to do the same thing with a simple GET request like this. So let's see if I can do something like this. If I go into my checkout folder and create, I'm going to sort of like follow the same pattern that I've learned with post requests, right? If I do switch to login.turbostream.erb. And then inside here, I'm going to do the Turbo Stream update checkout flow. Now, it would work with a single line like that. I tend to actually like using blocks instead, just in case I want to do something a little bit more complex. So the first thing that we're going to do is replace or update the checkout flow Turbo frame tag with checkout login form. So this is what we were doing in the controller, and now I'm doing it in switch to login.turbostream.erb. Now, so far, let's just see if that's going to work. And if I click this button, okay, so we have this error. Again, it's switch to login is missing a template for this request format and variant, which is a little bit different, a little bit weirder. Let's go back and see what we need to do. So in order to get this to work, we need to go to our link and add this. So again, I'm not using CSS classes here. So I'm going to do data. Now I think that all that's needed is this turbo stream true. Basically, we're saying to Rails that, yeah, you probably see this as a regular GET request, but actually instead we want you to treat it like a turbo stream. So let's see if that worked. And it does. Okay, so that, and again, I have not made the same change on the register. So let's just go ahead and do that now. I'm going to create the switch to register.turbostream. And again, we can put a pretty similar content in here, except we're going to change it to register form. And I'm going to go into that login form, and I'm going to update this link to say data turbo stream true. And let's refresh our page. We're looking at the registration form. I'm going to click the login link. It switches to the login view. And I'm going to click the register link, switches us back to registration view. Okay, so now so far, all I've done is the same thing as what we've done before, except now I'm processing it in a dedicated turbo stream file instead of handling all that logic inside of the controller itself, which is fine. It's just doing the same thing 2 different ways. But again, what we also want to do is change out this content as well. That's where having the separate turbo stream file makes it a little bit easier to organize. So let's go to our switch to login turbo stream. And in addition to updating this, we also want to update the checkout message to say login message. Again, what the update thing does is it finds the checkout message turbo frame tag, and it replaces the content of it with this partial. And let's go ahead and do the same thing in the registration form. Make this register message, and we'll refresh. Okay, so we're viewing the registration form. I click the login link, and now it says, welcome back over here. And I see my login form. And if I click register, we now see the registration form and the message to get people to sign up. So that is how we're actually swapping out 2 different things on the same page with a single link. This is a simple link. This is not a post request or a patch or anything like that. You know, again, it's like one of those little gotchas that I would not have found if I had not spent like all of yesterday digging to find out what like the exact configuration that we needed to have on these links. If you found that helpful, let me know in the comments. And if you'd like to see any other things on the topic of Hotwire or building in Ruby on Rails, let me know, and I'll add it to my queue of new videos to make on this channel. Thanks for watching.